All right, this is Miss Straughter. We're going to do the play posit for the next topic. It's been a while since we've done one of these, so just to remind you, you should have some fill in the blank notes that you will need as you follow along with me on this play posit. The other thing to remember, there will be 2 grades. Your first grade will be your notes. Once those are filled in, you will show that to me. And the second grade will be what you get on this play posit. There are questions throughout the play posit where the video will pause and you will need to answer the question. Do keep in mind you cannot skip forward. However, you can go back and look at a slide, and you can also use your notes. I did not make the questions for you to fail. I made them to make sure you are comprehending what we're discussing. On some of the slides, you will see this star. Anytime you see that star, make sure that you pause the video and read it, look at your notes, and fill in what's there. There are a lot of information on these slides, and you have to read them to figure out where to put your information for your fill in the blank. All right, so we're starting with the hydrologic cycle. You are used to hearing it being called the water cycle, but you do need to know that term because that will definitely be on CFA 14. Hydrological cycle, or the water cycle, is how water is naturally recycled on Earth. We've done a Nearpod, and so we understand that precipitation is when water comes to the Earth as rain, snow, sleet, or hail. We understand that evaporation is when water turns from a liquid to a gas as water vapor, and it starts to create the humidity and it goes up. We understand condensation is when water turns from a water vapor into a liquid, and then from there it helps create the clouds. The video also talked about surface runoff and groundwater as well. Not the video, excuse me, the Nearpod that you had done. Again, remember your stars tell you that there's something that you need to write down. Why is the water cycle so important? Well, 2/3 of the earth is covered with water, and that's 97.5% of that is salt water. And so all of that water, and we can only drink about 3% of it. The majority of fresh water is beyond our reach. Most of it is frozen to glaciers and polar caps. The water cycle is the natural circulation of water on Earth, the constant circulation of water between atmosphere, land, and sea. Usable water is very valuable because if you think about it, we use fresh water every day in our lives. Every time you wash your face, brush your teeth, drink, all your foods and things like that requires some type of water. Use the restroom, wash your produce, and eat your produce. Water is very valuable. And as humans, we have a big impact on the water. And so, yes, water is a natural cycle. The water cycle is natural that happens in nature, but we affect it in ways based off our actions. So if you look at the picture, you need to list 2 ways that humans impact the surface water and the groundwater. Different countries use different amounts of water, but we all tend to use them in the same way. And some of these actions can impact the water cycle, generating hydroelectricity, irrigation, deforestation, and the greenhouse effect, as well as motor vehicles used in animal farming affects the water cycle or the hydrological cycle. Hydroelectricity. Most of New Zealand's electricity is generated using hydro dams. This involves hydroelectricity. Most of New Zealand's electricity is generated using hydro dams. This involves changing the stored gravitational energy of water, held behind the dam into electrical energy that can be used. While this is non-polluting, renewable way to generate electricity, it does have some environmental impacts, especially when it's being mismanaged. Here's a picture of the Clyde Hydro Dam. It's found in the South Island. It uses water to generate electricity. It's in New Zealand, and it's the third largest hydro dam. So what issues do creating these dams cause? Well, one, rivers must be dammed, which can affect the function of the river both upstream and downstream. Lakes are usually formed from the water accumulating above the dam, and a buildup of silt can occur, while the amount of water is reduced further downstream. This can be problematic for any plants and animals that may find themselves with too much or too little water, and migrating fish cannot get through the dams. Seriously mismanaged dams can result in droughts downstream, while with streams completely drying up, leaving areas of unwatered land. People then have to look at ways of getting more water into these areas. Irrigation. As the human population has increased, so have our demands on the land. We need more food, and to make food, we need water. And if you remember when we did the activity with the ocean with the not the paper clips, but the clips representing 500 million people, how we're currently at 7 million and about to be at 7 billion and about to be at 8 billion, again, more resources are needed. So irrigation is artificial watering of land that does not get enough water through rainfall. Irrigation is used substantially by most countries, some more than others. Arid, which just means dry, land requires far more water, as do countries that have large, intensive farming communities. You've probably seen one of these before in some of the farm areas. This is the irrigation system. It's called a spray irrigator. The problem with irrigation is that it removes water from its natural source and often causes leaching and runoff where it is used. This removal of nutrients results in farmers using more fertilizers to keep their pastures productive, while the waterways become polluted. Another problem is that salt is brought up from lower levels. Deforestation, which is a term we've used before. We talked about it with CFA 13 and how deforestation affects biodiversity. But anyway, deforestation is the removal of trees. It's having a major impact on the water cycle as local and global climates change. Normally, trees release water vapor when they do transpiration, which you saw in the Nearpod transpiration, which producing a localized humidity. This water vapor then evaporates into the atmosphere, where it accumulates before precipitating back to the earth as rain, sleet, or snow. Here's an example with deforestation. Again, it's clear cutting of trees. So how much water do plants transpire? Plant transpiration is pretty much an invisible process. Since the water is evaporating from the leaf surface, you just don't go out and see the leaves sweating. Just because you can't see the water doesn't mean it's not being put into the air, though. During a growing season, a leaf will transpire many times more water than its own weight. An acre of corn gives off about 3,000 to 4,000 gallons of water each day, and a large oak tree can transpire 40,000 gallons per year. So it's a big deal when you cut down a lot of trees. Deforestation in one area can therefore affect the weather in another area, because if trees are cut down, there is less water to be evaporated into the atmosphere and subsequently less rain. At a local level, the land becomes drier and less stable. When it rains, instead of the water being soaked up, there's an increased runoff and leaching. Areas can become more prone to both drought and flooding, impacting on plants and animals, and also humans living near deforested areas. The greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect is a natural phenomenon of Earth's atmosphere trapping a range of gases, which in turn capture infrared radiation to keep our Earth at a moderate temperature range compared to the other planets in our solar system. As we discussed before, one of the things that our atmosphere is needed for is to keep heat here. So when it's nighttime, if we didn't have the atmosphere, once the sun went away, temperatures will get really, really cold. And then it would be extremely hot when the sun is hot here. And so we don't have those big temperature swings because our atmosphere helps regulate temperatures, which we know through convection because that's heat transfer in the air. However, if you look at this picture, this is what's naturally supposed to happen. This is how much heat we're supposed to be trapping. This is how many greenhouse gases are supposed to be in the atmosphere. However, now that we are here as humans, we are adding way too many greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And so since there's way more greenhouse gases, that means there's more heat being trapped, and there's not enough heat escaping like it's supposed to. And so that's why greenhouse effect is supposed to happen, but it's doing its job way too much because we're adding too many greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So human activities such as burning of fossil fuels has an effect on the overall increase of the Earth's temperature. Raising the Earth's temperature may mean that there is an increase of evaporation, melting of ice, or other processes of the water cycle that adversely affect the climate on Earth. Climate change increases our risk of both heavy rains and extreme drought. But why and how is that? Aren't the two contradictory? Science has shown that climate change touches every corner of our planet's ecosystem, and the water cycle is no exception. Because the process involved are highly dependent on temperature, changes in one have consequences on the other. Specifically, as global temperatures have steadily increased at their fastest rates in the millions of years, it's directly affected things like water vapor concentration, clouds, precipitation patterns, and stream flow patterns, which are all related to the water cycle. Climate change intensifies these cycles because as air temperatures increase, more water evaporates into the air. Warmer air can hold more water vapor, which can lead to more intense rainstorm, causing major problems like extreme flooding in coastal communities around the world. At the same time, that same area, as some areas are experiencing stronger storms, others are experiencing more dry air and even drought. Like we mentioned above, as temperatures rise, evaporation increases and soil dries out. Then when rain does come, much of the water runs off the hard ground into rivers and streams, and the soil just remains dry. The result? Still more evaporation from the soil and an increased risk of drought. So here is an example of how climate change impacts our weather. And so as we discussed, we did water cycle when we were talking about weather. So we know evaporation causes our humidity. Precipitation obviously is the rain and storms and things like that. And then we know that condensation creates those clouds. So if you look here, it says higher temperatures means that there's more evaporation from the land and sea into the atmosphere. So higher humidity. As the air gets warmer, it can hold more water vapor. This can lead to more intense rainstorms because the more water vapor in the air, the more it's going to rise and the more cloud formation is going to happen. And if there's some clouds and they continue to grow and grow and those drops get bigger, that means you're going to have more rain. Intense rainstorms increase the risk of flooding. Much of the water runoff into rivers and streams, doing little to dampen the soil. And this, combined with increased temperatures, increases the risk of drought because again the soil is already dry, and if there's runoff it's not getting any water, so it's just going to continue to get drier and drier because it's still going to have water taken from it via evaporation. The effects of acid rain. Acid precipitation causes water on the Earth's surface to be more acidic. Many plants and animals cannot live in more acidic conditions. They die and it affects everything in the food web. Acid rain can also deteriorate buildings, statues, etc. Acid rain, again, is caused by the burning of fossil fuels because that adds sulfur and nitrogen compounds to the air. And so these compounds, they mix with water vapor in the atmosphere, and it makes it more acidic. Other human activities that impact the water cycle is one, the use of toxic chemicals in agriculture and manufacturing, and runoff from chemical fertilizer and pesticides can pollute surface water or seep into the ground to contaminate groundwater. Runoff is the excess water that carries pollutants into storm drains and then into the ocean. And so your storm drains are the ones like when you're walking around and you see the little area where the water goes down. That's a reason why we're always like, don't put anything in there that should not be there. Water should be the only thing going in there, because that is what contributes to carrying pollutants into the ocean. Runoff is an environmental problem for all communities. Residents who live miles inland can contribute to ocean pollution simply by leaving their sprinklers on too long, washing their cars at home, or hosing down their driveways. Because when you hose down your driveway, it's usually oil and stuff on the ground, so you're hosing that down with it. When you wash your dog and wash your car and things like that, you're using chemicals to do that. And again, those chemicals go somewhere when that water goes down the drain. After this wasted water flows to the curb, it carries trash, fertilizers, pet waste, and other pollutants to the storm drain system, which eventually flow into the ocean. As runoff increases, infiltration, or the absorption of water back into the soil, decreases. This also prevents the replenishing of groundwater. And a lot of the water that we drink is groundwater. So if we're not getting that replenished or restored, that's also going to be an issue. So here is a picture of example of things that our runoff can pollute based off what we do. So here is residential runoff, like again, oil and gas, antifreeze, fertilizer, pesticides. We live in a more residential area. More in an urban area, you're gonna see still the same thing, oil and gas, but you also have your industrial waste, your cleaning products, paint and solvents. The negative effects of runoff pollution. Sediment can cloud the water and make it difficult for aquatic plants to grow and can destroy aquatic habitats. This one's a big one because, again, aquatic plants are producers. And so they need to be able to get sunlight. That's why they're near the top of the water, so they can get as much sunlight to make their own food. So if the water is cloudy, they can't make any food. And as we've learned with food chains and energy pyramids, your producers are the base of all ecosystems because they're the only ones who can take energy from the sun and start the process for the energy that's needed in the ecosystem. So if you're having aquatic plants not being able to eat, then of course they're going to destroy habitats. All right, excess nutrients can cause algae blooms. When they die, they decompose in a process that robs the water of its oxygen. Fish can't live in the air with low oxygen levels. Bacteria can wash into swimming areas, making beach closures necessary. Debris such as plastic bags, six-pack bottle rings, and cigarette butts can wash into water bodies and choke, suffocate, or disable ducks, fish, turtles, and birds. Household hazardous waste like insecticides, pesticides, paint, solvents, and used motor oil can poison aquatic life. Human activities affect the ocean too. Humans depend on the ocean for food, recreation, trade, travel, and jobs. Many human activities have modified, which means changed, the ocean. And we looked at that in more detail when we did the activity with the little canisters and we were dumping it into the water. So we saw, again, as the population of humans grew, as we had more and more humans, what we contributed or how we affected the ocean. We saw when we dumped those things into the tin. So what can you do? Like we said, it's not the end. There's stuff that we can do. So recycle or properly dispose of household materials and waste. Some things are not supposed to be just thrown in the trash. They need to go to a specific place. Don't dispose of them in sinks or toilets. Certain things should not be flushed or down the drain. Don't overwater your lawn or use too many pesticides or fertilizer. Don't wash your car at home. When you go to these car wash places, they are made to filter the water a certain way so that that water does not affect the environment. And pick up pet waste and dispose of it properly. You can flush it down. What can we do? So the previous slide is stuff that you yourself can do, but as a whole, this is what we as a world and population of humans can do together. We can cut down on production of greenhouse gases. We can use clean coal that does not contain as much sulfur. We can use scrubber technology when burning coal to remove sulfates before smoke enters the atmosphere. We can use less electricity, and we can use alternative forms of energy to generate electricity.